Viewers of the channel may know by now that I'm a huge Batman fan. B-Tas, The Dark Knight, they're all great. But what about some of the lesser-known iterations of the Caped Crusader that aren't really talked about as much? And in this video, I want to focus on 3 animated shows that aired from the late 2000s to the early 2010s, those 3 being The Batman, Batman the Brave and the Bold, and Beware the Batman. Now, 2 out of 3 of these shows, can you guess which 2, might not really be considered underrated anymore with, like, the internet and people talking about stuff now. They have gotten a bit more recognition in, like, recent years, but I still want to talk about these 3 because they are very similar. They're all from, like, the same era, and I do consider them, for the most part, pretty underrated. In other words, I like Batman and I want to talk about Batman. There. What do you say we do things chronologically? So let's start off in 2004 with our first show, The Batman. Now, I've gone back and forth on which Batman show is the best. Sometimes I've thought, maybe it's the original animated series, maybe it's Batman Beyond. And another one of my candidates was The Batman. That might be a shock to some of you, but honestly, yeah, I think The Batman really is one of the best Batman shows, and here's why. I really like the art style of this series. It kind of almost reminds me of Invader Zim, which is a bit weird, I don't know. It's very exaggerated. This world feels like a much more over the top world. And also, I think there was like a Ninja Turtle show that came out around the same time that had a similar kind of look to it. Just look at this Joker. Everything about him, from the way he moves and talks, he seems like less of a man and more of a creature. And surprisingly, this Joker is actually voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, and if you know that name, then you know that usually he voices a lot more deeper voiced characters, so it's kind of surprising that he was able to do this role so well. I recall hearing somewhere that he got the role after getting like really mad after being delayed by traffic or something, and they liked how angry he was by that, but I don't know. I don't know how true that is, so don't quote me on that. And then there's this series as Penguin, who was voiced by Tom Kenny, SpongeBob. And I usually never really cared for the whole, like, pompous jerk Penguin. This one seems to, like, think he's a pompous jerk, but is actually just this, like, feral animal who has no money and he's just crawling on the floor, stealing dollars out of couch cushions. I like that take a lot more. Danny DeVito Penguin was also pretty gross, but he wasn't, like, fun gross, he was just regular gross. Speaking of Batman Returns, Catwoman is actually not in this series as much as you'd expect, but the few stories she did get were really fun and creative, such as Batman and Catwoman getting handcuffed together and her even stealing the Bat Belt. And then, yeah, this series Riddler, he looks like the type of guy who would remove his own rib cage to suck his own dick. I gotta be honest, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this Riddler. The goth aesthetic I don't hate, but I don't really love it either because it doesn't really play into the fact that he's a mastermind in any way. I feel just kind of indifferent about this design. Also, he's voiced by Robert Englund, which is kind of cool. This Mr. Freeze isn't as nuanced or sympathetic as the original B-Task Mr. Freeze, but I think it kind of works for him. His design reflects the fact that he's a lot more bloodthirsty than your usual Mr. Freeze, and unlike literally every other version, he's actually not a scientist, he's a criminal. Instead of his suit being there to protect him, it's actually there to protect everyone else, since his body is constantly generating cold. This Mr. Freeze not only has powers, but he can even survive in non-zero degree environments. It's also extremely, very loosely, up to interpretation, implied that Mr. Freeze may have killed Batman's parents. The guy's name in the comics was Joe Chill. Chill, Freeze, it all just makes too much sense. A lot of the character designs are a far cry from what's usually expected, but I welcome it, since the entire point of adaptations is that things are meant to be different. There are also a ton of really great oddball villains like Spellbinder, Everywhere Man, and Ragdoll. I especially like how this version of Killer Croc is less of a rampaging monster and more of a cunning mastermind. I like things like the Batman where they're able to make changes but still maintain a lot of the core elements of Batman. There was an unreleased live action Batman Year One movie that would have completely retconned his entire origin, and maybe as a story it didn't sound that bad, but still, it just wasn't really that respectful to the Batman mythos. This is going to be an important theme for the video. What I like about the Batman is that despite its unique visual style, it's actually very realistic. In one episode, Batman is up late fighting a villain and then gets knocked unconscious. The next day, he was supposed to attend a meeting as Bruce Wayne and ends up being late. And because of this, a bunch of the company's money, which was going to go to charity, gets taken away. Focusing more on Bruce Wayne's personal life and introducing more consequences is a really great direction for the series, and it kind of reminded me of Spectacular Spider-Man, which makes sense given that Greg Weisman worked on this show. Batman as a character evolves with each season, as the status quo gets mixed up every time. The first season introduces Ethan Bennett and Ellen Yin, two detectives who act as kind of allies, kind of antagonists. Things are further complicated by the fact that Ethan is actually Bruce Wayne's friend in his normal life, and spoilers, but at the end of the first season he gets turned into Clayface by the Joker. In Season 2, Ellen becomes Batman's full ally, and he gives her a communicator device. She serves as his inside man for the police department. By the end, Batman is fully accepted as a hero, and Commissioner Gordon is introduced. Now, Season 3 would introduce Batgirl, and then Robin would later be introduced in Season 4. This wasn't an artistic choice, as they legally were not allowed to use Robin because of the Teen Titans series running at the same time. But in-universe, this actually really makes sense. Since Robin was recruited while Batgirl more volunteered, it makes sense that Batman would kind of warm up to the idea of having a sidekick because of his work with Batgirl. The final season wraps everything up with a big Justice League crossover, and it's so great to see how he goes from being this, creature of the night in the first season to this fully respected hero by the final season. It really does feel like Batman's life story. Seasons 4 and 5 also focus a lot on Batman's relationship with Martian Manhunter, which is a really great dynamic that I wish we got to see more of. Hugo Strange serves as something of an overarching antagonist for the series. He's, spoilers again, actually revealed to be the villain of the final episode, and surprisingly this is really the only major time he's appeared in a Batman cartoon aside from one episode in BTAS. In 2005, there is a TV movie based on the Batman called The Batman vs. Dracula. This movie does not pull punches. There's even an entire scene where a vampirized Joker bathes in blood. It's the only time Joker has ever become a vampire in all of animation, and speaking of only, it's also the only appearance of Vicky Vale in the entire show. There's some really great fight scenes here. It does the kind of thing where, the villain very, very loosely resembles Batman, so the entire city blames Batman and all goes after him thing, which is kind of cliche in movies like this, but whatever, it's fine. And then there are even some, genuinely really freaky moments. Overall, 9 out of 10, not enough blood. There was going to be a sequel to this movie called The Batman vs. Hush, which never got made. So for those of you who feel blueballed on a Hush Batman movie, there is the 2019 movie Batman Hush, so take with that what you will. And one final thing before I wrap up my section on the Batman, this has my favorite iteration of Alfred. If you ever want to get into Batman and you're looking for a place to start, The Batman is the perfect entry point. While Batman the Animated Series was one of the most poetic takes on the character, with a lot of stories being so self-contained and so compelling they could have been entire movies, The Batman differs in the sense that it makes Bruce Wayne feel like a real person. Admittedly, Season 5 does feel a bit unnecessary since I feel like the ending to Season 4 was just too perfect to top, but it is bring up an interesting point because Batman becoming this world-renowned hero that's trusted and beloved by everyone is actually a great segue into the next show, Batman the Brave and the Bold, which premiered 2008, the exact same year The Batman ended. I almost don't want to cover this show in this video because I want to do a separate dedicated video to it, but I guess I can do both. I'll just try not to say too much. You know what, consider this my spoiler-free review. How about that? Batman the Brave and the Bold differs from most Batman shows in the sense that it's not as dark or gritty, it's a lot more lighthearted and comedic, and it also focuses a lot more on team ups. It draws heavy inspiration from the Golden Age of comics as well as the Silver Age. The Silver Age is often looked down upon because, well, it was pretty freaking stupid, and it basically exists because of a thing called the Comics Code, which censored comics. So the Silver Age is often viewed as the neutered era where everything had to be squeaky clean and family friendly. The Golden Age, on the other hand, was not family friendly. There were zero rules to the comics, so, they just kind of did whatever and got away with it. It was the freaking Wild Wild West, and I don't mean that because they were literally the Wild Wild West. In fact, DC Comics were one of the first kind of writers to use the multiverse in a fictional sci-fi story. They wanted to explain why the pre-censorship era and post-censorship era were so different. Thus, they created Earth 1 and Earth 2. So if it weren't for this little censorship tag right here, we wouldn't have this goddamn freaking oversaturated market! In case you haven't noticed it yet, I really like the 40s pulp era of comics, and not just Marvel and DC. I just can't help falling in love with just about every one of these campy caped heroes. And the thing is, some of them I feel like, if handled the right way, can be genuinely really good. And I know it sounds like I'm trailing off, and well, I kind of am, but it's because I want you to understand that I have a deep passion for this era, and I developed this passion because of watching this show. If I had to pick a single TV show that would be my all-time favorite TV show, I'd have to say Batman the Brave and the Bold. It is my comfort food. I've rewatched it more times than I can count. It's a very stylish show and one that definitely leans into its own style, but it still never loses its substance. It takes a lot of the really stupid, dumbass ideas from the Silver Age and expands upon them and adds an extra layer of depth and character. I guess what I'm trying to say is just because it is more family friendly and not as gritty doesn't really mean it's dumbed down or lesser. Believing that bloodshed automatically makes a story good is a very one-sided way to view entertainment. Certain people, let me rephrase that, stupid people basically take one look at it and go, it's not supposed to be family friendly. Batman has to be dark and gritty. It's one thing to watch it and go, it's not really for me, but to claim that this version of Batman shouldn't exist or that Batman should always be dark and gritty is kind of stupid because this character was conceived for children, you know that, right? That's the whole point of an adaptation, to have variety. If everything were exactly the same, if everything followed the comics to a T, then we wouldn't have the Batcave, we wouldn't have Harley Quinn, we wouldn't have Terry McGinnis. In a scene that genuinely made me laugh out loud, they do actually poke fun at all the fanboys who wanted it to be dark and gritty, and what I like about it especially is that they do it and then it's done. They do the joke once and that's it. It's not like Teen Titans Go where they passive aggressively do it over and over again, and whether or not they're being serious, it does still kind of send the kind of impression that they genuinely hate the original show. I don't want to throw too much shade at Teen Titans Go, because it actually can be funny whenever it's violent for the sake of violent. It's more funny in a juvenile sort of way. And actually, going back to the whole self-aware fanboy thing, this show does overall feel like a giant love letter to the history of Batman and to just comics as a whole. The Lego Batman movie, though it's great, it does feel a lot more like a love letter to just the Batman movies specifically. It has all those characters from the comics, but it feels like they don't really know who those characters are. Batman the Brave and the Bold feels like a love letter to everything. It's a love letter to Kevin Conroy, to Adam West, to Frank Miller, all of it. Both of them feature Gentleman Ghost, who's a pretty obscure character from the comics, and while in the Lego Batman movie, you could pretty much replace him with a nameless henchman and things would be exactly the same, in Batman Brave and the Bold, he's a genuinely really fun and interesting antagonist who feels true to the character. And I'm not trying to rip on the Lego Batman movie. Obviously, it's a really great movie and I really like it. I can still just, have issues with it at the same time as liking it. Part of what makes this Batman work is that he fits in this universe. If you were to put this Batman in Justice League Unlimited or The Dark Knight, it just wouldn't work. This specific type of universe is a Super Friends style universe, so you kind of have to suspend your disbelief more than you normally would. And even this version of Batman is a kind of exaggerated hero archetype. He's so smart, he's always one step ahead of every villain, and he's always, super hyper masculine and he beats up the bad guy, but at the same time, he's like a really nice person and like genuinely a good friend, unlike a lot of other iterations of Batman that are more cold and reserved. It's even implied that he's never not Batman. Like, he's always just constantly Batman. He wears his bat suit everywhere he goes. Like, there are a lot of scenes throughout the series where you would see him in, like, a courtroom or a hospital or something, and he's just, like, in full bat suit. And it's, like, it's kind of funny, but it also kind of plays into the whole idea that, like, he's so trusted and beloved by everyone in the world, he doesn't need to take off the bat suit. When your customizable character is in the cutscene. There is also a heavy emphasis on team ups. Pretty much every episode features Batman alongside a different hero. Characters like Alfred and Batgirl are pushed off to the side in favor of other characters like Adam Strange or Blue Beetle. The team ups allow Batman to be put in situations he wouldn't normally be in. One episode he's in space fighting Darkseid, the next one he's in the past fighting a wizard, the next one he's in a warehouse fighting Two-Face. There's not a whole lot of continuity within the series, which makes rewatching certain episodes a lot easier, and that's also why I consider it a comfort show, because I just kind of pick a random episode and watch one sometimes. I'm going to stop there because I really do not want to say too much about this show. I will come back to this in a future video where hopefully I'll just gush about every single detail I love about it for 10 straight hours. I know this is pretty abrupt, but moving on to the next cartoon, Beware the Batman. Now, The Batman and Batman the Brave and the Bold have gotten a lot more respect in recent years, and if there's any show that I'd say is genuinely underrated, it would be Beware the Batman. Now, some people say that Beware the Batman is the worst Batman cartoon, and that's kind of true, mainly out of process of elimination, but then again, I've also never seen, like, the old Batman cartoons, and they could be worse, but I just really don't want to watch them, so I don't know. But at the same time, I honestly do think this show is kind of weak. Now, this is a CGI show, and CGI shows have a habit of sometimes, what's the word? Being really ugly. Now, not all CGI shows look bad, but this one does. I think his suit is what mainly gets me. The suit itself, the colors and the design of it feel very uninspired and bland, and his body type feels like they couldn't decide if they wanted him to be skinny like in The Batman or buff like in Batman Brave and the Bold, so they just kind of did both and it looks weird. I mean, you get used to it after a while, but like, whatever. What I think sets Beware the Batman apart from most other iterations, or I guess specifically TV show iterations, is that it's, I guess, more lore heavy. There's a lot of emphasis on the backstory and Alfred's days in MI6. There are two story arcs in its 26 episode season, and they both very heavily revolve around enemies from Alfred's past coming back to haunt him, which is a really unique direction for the show. The series' main focus is Batman getting a new bodyguard slash sidekick, Katana, and she also used to know Alfred. Now, in most versions of Katana, she's this, silent badass, but here, she's not silent, which at first glance is like, okay, fine, it's different interpretation, but I still don't really like this Katana all that much, primarily because she's kind of annoying. She's said to be this, like, CIA operative, but at the same time, she's, like, more immature and inexperienced than, like, most versions of Robin. For me personally, she is what brings down most of the series. Like, there's one episode where Batman leaves, and then her immediate reaction is, "Oh boy, it's party time!" Now, credit where credit is due. Towards the end of the first story arc, there's a twist revealed, not really going to spoil what it is, but it does make her character a lot more interesting. Overall, I do like the idea of Katana being a mainstay character in a Batman show, but I feel like they just dumbed her down way too much for it to really work properly. This version of Commissioner Gordon is also really good because he's initially much more antagonistic towards Batman, similar to Ethan and Ellen in The Batman. He does eventually come around and start trusting him, like most other iterations though, which good thing for Batman too, because this Gordon would have definitely shoved his foot up his ass. That's a That 70s Show joke for you older fellas. Hopefully there's nothing, wrong or bad about any of the people associated with that show, because that, oh boy, that'd make this joke real awkward, wouldn't it? This version of Batgirl is, well, scratch that, not Batgirl at all. She's actually Oracle from the beginning, but there is no wheelchair, which is really sad because that was a missed opportunity for some representation there. Batman has a handful of a few other allies throughout the series, like Metamorpho and, well, Manhunter? He's really obscure. For me, anyway, watching through the series felt very fresh. Like, if the Batman is a mystery in the same sense as, like, Scooby Doo, where it's cartoony and there are powers or whatever and it's fun, this is more of a mystery in the sense that's, like, legitimately scary and creepy. Professor Pig is a villain that I always thought was kind of yucky. I always thought he was too gross and creepy and weird. Kind of like the Dollmaker. They're just too gross to be Batman villains. I do really like this version of Professor Pig, though. A lot of the death traps and stuff he builds I could see in a The Batman 2021 type movie. Like, if only we actually got to see the aftermath of some of these death traps, that would have been really cool. Some fans were off put by his assistant, Mr. Toad, but I actually do kind of like how he is this cartoony frogman creature working alongside a realistic serial killer, but it's never really like addressed or made fun of. That's just kind of how this world is, and I oddly kind of like that. But I think part of why this works so well is because it's animated and it wouldn't really work in live action. We get introduced to the Cauldron, which is an area of Gotham City that's like borderline post apocalyptic, and there are all these like creepy zombie homeless guys roaming around. God, can't have shit in Gotham. There's a lot of really great oddball villains thrown in, like there's Humpty Dumpty, who's pretty creepy, then there's Magpie, who's less creepy, then there's Cypher, who's okay, it's creepy again. And of course, who could forget everyone's favorite Phosphorus Rex, not to be confused with Dr. Phosphorus, not to be confused with Blight, not to be confused with other Blight. I know this is probably going to get me crucified because anarchy is one of the most fondly remembered things about this series, but I don't really vibe with anarchy. Anarchy is like this Batman's Joker. He is his opposite. Visually, they look completely different, and he has the same kind of physical abilities and mental power as Batman. The series wants you to believe that he's this mastermind who's always one step ahead, and although he does have that potential, I feel like the series is lying to me. Like, what it's saying and what it's doing don't really correlate. And a big part of his character in the comics was that he did actually have a good message behind what he was doing. Batman just didn't agree with his methods of doing it, whereas here he's just a psycho. Like, he feels like a pale imitation of the Joker. The standalone episodes are a bit hit or miss. Some are actually really tense and really good, but then others feel kind of dragged down by some of the writing. But what I think absolutely smacks are the two main storylines. The Soul Taker sword is pretty important to the first arc, but for whatever reason they say that it doesn't actually kill you when it takes your soul, even though you look like this with no soul, and every character that gets drained never shows up again. Like, they're freaking dead, okay? Okay, look, I know in my Teen Titans video I said I don't like Deathstroke, and I still mostly stand by that opinion, but in the second arc of the series, this Deathstroke is like so freaking badass. He's everything Anarchy wishes he was. He's actually one step ahead of Batman, and legitimately comes really close to defeating him by the end of the series. And like I said before, both the first and second story arc tie into Alfred's past in MI6, but I'm not going to spoil how, because just go watch it yourself. We also get a Two-Face origin story. Now, a pro is that there's a lot of build-up to the event that gives him his scar, like it's not just a random thing that happens to him. But a con is that he's kind of a dick from the beginning, like he's introduced as an antagonist, and he's not even friends with Bruce Wayne. If anything, he has like a one-sided crush on him. I like the idea that his platform as mayor is to get all the supers out of Gotham, because he does kind of have a point there, but the series never really makes you sympathize with it or see it from his perspective, so his fall from grace is never really impactful. Interestingly, his face being scarred isn't the catalyst that drives him insane, it's more the final straw that breaks him. I do really like the design of him just being like bandages, but also the portrayal of DID is a little inaccurate. The final few episodes are really exciting. I don't want to spoil what happens, but like a lot is at stake, and it really does make you think that Batman might actually lose the fight. By the end of the series, Batman builds up his own team, the Outsiders, which is a really cool homage to the comics, and in the unreleased season 2, they would have added Cyborg and Red Arrow, which I'm not a huge fan of because that makes the group feel a little too Teen Titans. Also, if Red Arrow's there, then where's Green Arrow? I'm a little disappointed the group doesn't have Mr. Terrific since they teased him in literally the first episode. They also would have introduced the Joker in the second season, so here's what he looks like. I don't know exactly why Beware the Batman was cancelled. Some sources say different things. Some say that there was like a controversy about the use of guns, others say that it just wasn't popular enough, and then other sources say that the series was too expensive to maintain. But a common theory I remember hearing is that Cartoon Network intentionally killed the series. This was in like 2012, 2013, and around that same time is when they intentionally killed Ben 10 Omniverse and Generator X, since that was kind of the transitional point when the entire network just became Teen Titans Go and nothing else. Halfway through the series, they just pulled it from airing, and then a year later aired the rest on Adult Swim. And I remember this show first came out, I remember not being super into it, but I also remember waking up early one morning and then seeing the final episode the day it aired, so, I mean, there's that. I can't say I'm like super devastated by it since there are plenty of shows that end on cliffhangers and are never continued. This one doesn't really feel like that. It's the type of ending where it's like it feels conclusive, but there's still some hints at more, so it's not really a cliffhanger. I don't really know. I definitely don't think Beware the Batman is the worst thing ever. It certainly is one of the weaker takes on Batman, but it's still pretty solid for what it's worth. All three of these shows have one thing in common: a baller intro. In all seriousness, I think all three of these shows stand very well in their own right. It shows why Batman works as such a flexible character. Each iteration is different, but still recognizable. There can be decades worth of Easter eggs and references from all sorts of different mediums sewn into each iteration, and Batman's one of the few characters you can really pull that off with. If every adaptation were exactly the same to a T, then what's the point of even making them? It'd just get old really quickly. And if everyone were completely different and separated from each other, then no one really knows what it's supposed to be. And that's why I think Batman has kind of found the perfect middle ground with adaptations. That's not necessarily to say that it isn't still oversaturated, though. Batman Brave and the Bold even had a joke at one point about how there's so many Batman shows, yet there's never been a Batgirl show. Also, it was CGI, and Beware the Batman, the next show after this one, was also CGI. Coincidence? I think probably. So I hope this video convinces you to check out at least one of these shows, and if you've already seen them, then, well, that's great too. You can tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. But of course, you could always pick option B, which is take that giant ninja sword right there and stab me directly in the stomach, which will certainly kill me. But I'm sure you won't do that because, you know, we're best pals, and you'd never stab me, because best pals don't stab each other. Why? Why, loyal viewer? Why would you do this to me?